G'day guys, welcome back to the channel, and today we are here to review round 1. We had a lot of big games. The first game of round 1 with Carlton and Richmond was a massive game, finished really well. We had the Swans versus Collingwood and so much more. But before we get straight into that, guys, of course we do have our AFL print company here, BR Designs. If you guys want one of the best AFL prints in the game, then make sure to go check out BR Designs, which is linked down below. And if you use the code YouTube, you will get 10% off your purchase. So we have designs for every single team, guys, so make sure to go check them out. And let's get into the review of round 1. So like I mentioned, guys, of course, round 1 started with the traditional starting game. Of course, we had opening round, but this was the traditional starter between Carlton and Richmond. And as most of you would know by now, Carlton won by 5 points, 86 to 81. It was a pretty close contest throughout most of the night. Richmond did have a slow start, but did come back to actually lead the first quarter. Carlton then dominated the second, but just couldn't convert their chances. They kicked 3 goals, 6 in the end. So pretty disappointing there. And in the third quarter, it was just a goal-for-goal contest. 6 lead changes into 3-quarter time. Carlton held on in the final moments after Richmond did really well to keep in touch, I thought. And we'll get into the injuries in a second, but of course, Richmond did have 3 players down in the second half. So for them to have kept so close to Carlton in the end, I thought was a really telling performance from Richmond. And after a really disappointing game against the Gold Coast last week, I think they really needed a good performance like this. So it was really good to see from Richmond in the end. To be honest, though, I will say Carlton it always felt like Carlton were in front. They were like always going to win the game. It never really felt like Richmond could get in front. But yeah, I think there was some really good telling signs for Richmond. Last week, they got well beaten by the Gold Coast. So for Richmond fans out there, I think they're a little bit excited. I wouldn't say that they dominated by any means. I don't think they're going to be finishing higher than the bottom 4, in my opinion. But they did have a couple of good moments. Talking about the injuries, though, Dion Prestia did a hammy. He's going to be probably a 3 or 4 week injury, so that's really disappointing. He's always had a lot of soft tissue injuries, Dion Prestia, so that's really tough for him. They had Tyler Young as well, who landed. It was like landing whiplash. He got concussion, so he was out. He'll miss next week. And of course, the terrible injury to Josh Gibkiss. Missed all of 2023 with a hamstring tendon injury, and now he's done his ACL. It was really disappointing. On the game, when I was watching it, the knee just went the way you just don't want to see it. It just bended inwards. It was a terrible look. I could not watch it after. I just really feel sorry for him. I mean, he's got so much potential. He looked like he was basically going to be leading the line for Richmond going into the future of that defence, and now he's going to miss yet another year of AFL footy. So all hopes to him. Let's go to the statistics for the AFL Fantasy watchers out there. Noah Bolter scored 108, top scored along with Nick Vlossen with 108. Tom de Koning got 107 with Nick Newman. Harry Mackay got the 103, and then Toby Nankervis got the 103 as well. But of course, guys, at the end of the round, we will be on the reviews. We will be doing the Boundary Riders votes. Now, of course, we did it last week for the opening round, and of course, we'll be doing it this week. So, the 3 votes in this game, I gave to Paddy Cripps. 2 votes went to Noah Bolter, and the 1 vote went to Mitch McGovern. Paddy Cripps, I just thought in that third quarter, when they were getting really challenged by Richmond, I thought that he was really good in the midfield, and I just think overall he was probably their best player in the game, in my opinion. Especially, there was times in the last as well, where I think Richmond just were getting on top at times in the middle of the ground, and I think Paddy Cripps just really lifted. Took some really good marks around the ground as well. Let's go to Friday night, Collingwood versus the Swans, and the Swans went out winners by 33 points. The Sydney won 102 to Collingwood 69. Top scorer in the end was Logan McDonald with the 4 goals too. Great performance from him. I will say though, for Logan, he kicked all 4 of his goals inside 15 metres, but you got to be in the right position, and 4 goals is a really good catalyst to get your season going. After last week, he had a pretty disappointing performance against Melbourne. But let's get into the talking points. To be honest, Sydney, I think, dominated the majority of the game. Despite Collingwood leading at quarter time, Sydney, I think, were the dominant team. Obviously, in the commentary, they were trying to spur that Collingwood are going to come back. It's way too early to write off Collingwood. If you're writing off Collingwood now, I think you're a bit of an idiot. They're a shell of themselves from last year. Collingwood desperately need to win next week against St Kilda, but they just didn't bring enough pressure. I felt Sydney just brought the pressure early. Collingwood couldn't compete with it. They just made so many turnovers in their back half. It was just almost an embarrassment at the end, especially in that third quarter. I think they made 4 forward half turnovers, which resulted in goals. Not good enough from Collingwood. They'll know that. I think they'll definitely bounce back next week. Let's quickly mention the midfielders for the Swans, because despite them missing 3 All-Australian midfielders in Luke Parker, Taylor Adams, and Cal Mills, they have found some players in there to really replace them. Rowbottom, Heaney, obviously we'll talk about in a second. Errol Goulden, of course. James Jordan, obviously recruited this year. He had a pretty good performance as well. And Chad Warner, who, I mean, now he's finally he's getting on the scoreboard. That's something that he's kind of he hasn't been able to get to yet. But he's kicked goals in both games so far this season, and he had a massive performance against Collingwood in the end. He had 27 touches, he had 4 tackles, kicked 3 goals as well. Chad Warner was brilliant. Isaac Heaney was brilliant as well. We'll talk about him when we get to the votes. Just before we get to a little bit more, I just want to talk about the midfield goal scorers. So, for Sydney, other than the forwards that they had Heaney kicked 2 goals in the end. He played a little bit up forward, but mostly played midfield. He was brilliant. Warner, like I said, kicked 3 goals. And then James Rowbottom and McInerney both got a goal as well. So if Sydney can get their midfielders on the board as well as their forwards firing, they're going to be big this season, the Swans. I think Collingwood, another big issue, which, I mean, they had last year, but they just found options. Like they were just so good in defence that they didn't have to fix this issue, I would say. But their forward line, they just have to find another avenue to go. In the end, between Myercheck, Johnson, Cox and Cameron, and I'm going to give Darcy Cameron a little bit because he did go forward a little bit in this game. Out of those tall forwards, they only combined for 1 goal too throughout the whole game. And the 1 goal went to Darcy Cameron late in the 4th quarter when the Swans kind of stopped. So for 3 of their keys to not get on the board at all is not good enough. We'll get to the statistics. So for the AFL Fantasy watchers out there, Isaac Heaney led all comers with the 125, Nick Dacos with the 123, Chad Warner with the 112, Errol Goulden with the 111, Braden Maynard with the 105, and then James Rowbottom with the 104. So, to the votes, we had Isaac Heaney with the 3 votes, Chad Warner with the 2, and then 1 vote I gave to James Rowbottom. Now, I absolutely love James Rowbottom's game. I think he's incredibly underrated for Sydney's midfield. I think early in that game as well, especially in the second, I think he kicked his goal in the second term. I think it was a real trendsetter for the Swans to break forward because they had their opportunities in the first quarter, but they just couldn't convert them. He kicked a big goal in the second term, just gave them a real momentum push from when he kicked it from 50. And I just want to mention his stats. He only had 16 touches to kick the goal. Doesn't sound much, but the defensive pressure that he brings to the Sydney midfield, I think is just something that they don't have a lot of. He had 13 tackles in the end. He's a tackling machine, James Rowbottom, and obviously he's not like he's not going to be on the headlines like the Gouldens and the Warners, but he does his job every single week for Sydney, and he had a good performance, so I think he deserved the 1 vote in the end. On to Saturday afternoon, we had the Bombers versus the Hawks, and the Bombers ran away in the end to a 24-point win to record their first win of the season, 107 to the Hawks, 83. Top scorer is Jake Stringer, and there was 1 injury in this game, went to Zach Reid. He had a hamstring injury, was subbed out at half-time, so there is some concern on him being able to come back when he will return. Obviously, he had a tough year last year with injury, so really disappointing there for another young defender in the AFL. Let's get to the game itself. It was a very tight first quarter, but the Bombers did kick straight, which gave them the lead in the first break. They kept a close contest at half-time, with the Hawks missing their chances, kicking 18 scoring shots to the Bombers' 10. You know, Hawthorn did recruit very well in the off-season, up forward as well, but doesn't help when you can't kick straight. Obviously, you can recruit the world, but if you don't kick straight, that's going to be a big issue. The Bombers actually went on and took a slight lead at three-quarter time, but the scoring accuracy did prove the difference. Bombers were 12-goal-3 to Hawthorn's 9-goal-14. So what's that? 15 scoring shots to 23. Bombers broke away late. They went on to win by 4 goals, which I don't think the scoreline went above 2 goals for most of the match. But the Bombers were able to break away late, and if you look at the scoring shots again, the Bombers only had 22 scoring shots, but they were able to kick 17 goals. So if you kick 17 goals in a game of footy, it's very rare you're going to lose the game. But Hawthorn had 6 more scoring shots, but only kicked 11 goals. That's really where the game lied in the end. With a team like Essendon, where they're probably competing for position this year, they've got to be trying to win these games. And it's very early on, obviously, and Jack Ginnivan had a pretty good game, so he's a good recruit. Maybe Chol actually got subbed out, I believe. I think it was tactical, but I think he kicked 2 goals as well, so he didn't have a bad performance. Hawthorn are kind of competing with Essendon this year to, push up towards the 8. I'm not saying either of them will, but they're pushing towards the 8, and, both of them, they just didn't take their chances, and this would have been a really good start to the season for the Hawks, but the Bombers did well enough to win. So moving on to the statistics, Archie Perkins with the 130 in the AFL fantasy points, Zach Merritt with the 125, Will Setterfield with the 115, Andrew McGrath with the 109, Dylan Moore with the 99, and Massimo D'Ambrosio, the new recruit, got 94. Let's get to the votes. Archie Perkins got the 3 votes, 2 votes went to Jake Springer, and 1 vote I gave to Matt Guelphy. Now, Archie Perkins, first I'm going to talk about him. This is almost a coming-of-age game for him. He had 27 centre bounce attendances. He had 24 touches, 12 tackles, and kicked 2 goals. I think he's basically a mainstay in their midfield for the rest of the year now. This is something that Essendon kind of lacked for quite a while, a tackling midfielder. Will Setterfield kind of did it a little bit last year before he got injured, but Merritt's not really that type. Darcy Parish was obviously out, but he doesn't bring that tackling pressure. If Archie Perkins joins that midfield group and can bring that to his game, he's a pretty good ball user. He's got amazing talent galore, and he can kick straight. So if he can add that different dimension to Essendon's midfield this year, I think he could be anything. And he was massive in this game, by far. Leaps and strides above everyone else in the game. So that's why I gave him the 3 votes. And now Matt Guelphy. Now you may be wondering, why did I give Matt Guelphy a vote here? Well, like I've mentioned many times on the channel, with the Boundary Riders medal, the votes don't just go to the most possessions or whatever midfielder, got the most fantasy points or whatever. The reason why I gave Matt Guelphy a vote in this game was the fact his role, his lockdown job on James Sicily. He did such a good job with his tagging role, and we've seen in the past that James Sicily has been able to win games, with his foot skills and being able to play well in defence for Hawthorn. But he was able to keep James Sicily no contested marks in the whole game, which is massive. He only had 72 metres gained, which is absolutely one of the lowest you would see from James Sicily. He only took 2 marks across the whole afternoon, and he only had 11 touches. So Matt Guelphy had a massive performance. Really good job to lock down James Sicily and went a long way into Essendon winning their first game of the season. And not only that, but on the other side of the things, he actually went forward for Essendon and helped them on the other end. He was able to kick 2 goals, but also had 4 goal assists. That's massive from a small forward. And then was able to have 6 score involvements as well. So a great performance from Matt Guelphy, and that's the reason why he got the 1 vote for me. After that, we get to the Giants versus North Melbourne. The Giants went on winners by 39 points over North. They won 121 to North Melbourne 82. Jesse Hogan had a massive performance. He ended with 6 goals too. Really good performance from him. Now, there was one injury from the game, another devastating injury to another young defender. This was to Gota. It looked like such an innocuous incident. What happened was he was inside the defensive 50. He went to turn, tried to block off a leading lane for, I think it was Hogan. And as soon as he turned, something happened in his ankle. A lot of people are saying it's an Achilles tendon just breaking. But he basically turned and immediately went to the ground clutching at his ankle. It was really disappointing. It was such an innocuous injury. All hopes for him as well, but really unlucky for him. Let's talk about the game itself, though. The Giants led from start to finish. I don't think anyone was really expecting it much different. North Melbourne did have some promising signs. We did see the likes of Sheasel have a massive performance. He's in for a big year. LDU, great game from him. First gamer in McKercher had a really good performance, along with Zane Dersma. Really excited for them to see how they can build for North Melbourne in their midfield and up forward Dersma. I do want to quickly mention Tristan Sherry. He doesn't get into the votes because GWS were just so much better. I'll just put it out there. And Tristan Sherry didn't get into the votes, but I think he was North Melbourne's best player. He had he's finally got that first choice ruck spot. And congratulations to him, because he has deserved it for quite a while. But Goldstein's obviously been in front of him for so long. He has 18 touches in the midfield while playing through the ruck. Took 5 marks, 9 tackles, and he kicked a goal. This, obviously, Kieran Briggs came into the season late for the Giants and had a massive performance there. But I think Tristan Sherry, he's always had that potential. But this start of the season, he looked good, and I think he can definitely bring something to North Melbourne. But on the Giants, I honestly think they are an early contender. It's obviously way too early to tell who's going to go on to win the premiership. But GWS look good. They did really well against Collingwood last week, and North Melbourne, a much lesser opponent, but they did what they had to do. They kept them at bay, 5 goals for most of the match. Wasn't their best performance, but if their worst performance is a 40-point win against North Melbourne, I think most people are going to take that, if I'm being honest. And they honestly should have won by more. They had 36 scoring shots in the end and only kicked 17 goals. And I think Toby Green kicked 4 or 5 behinds without getting a goal, which is another good sign for the Giants. Toby Green has had pretty much no influence in their first 2 games, and they've dominated both of their opponents. So The Giants are in for a big year, I think. So, massive performances up in the midfield and in the forward line for the Giants. They look good this year. And as we know for quite a while now, the Giants' defense is one of the best in the comp with Jack Buckley and Taylor down there. So, they've got all guns blazing for the Giants this year. Now getting to the statistics, Tom Green got the 141 in the AFL Fantasy. Jesse Hogan got the 121 along with Cherry. We had Harry Shees with the 120 as well. Cornelio and Kelly with the 102, rounding out the top 6. And now we get to the votes. 3 votes, just edged out Tom Green. I gave Jesse Hogan the 3 votes. Tom Green got the 2 and the 1 vote to Josh Kelly. Great performance from Tom Green again, though. I think he's got 5 votes so far on the Bounty Riders tally, but he's in for a massive year. My brother picked him early for a Brownlow. Big year for Tom Green. He started really well. And the Giants, a big win in the end. So good start from them. After that, we get to Saturday night. Geelong versus the Saints. Geelong ran out at 8-point winners against the Saints after the Saints made a late charge, almost stole the show after the showing of Joel Selwood's new stand, but Geelong won 76-68. Top scorers in the end on Geelong's side, we had Dempsey, and then for St Kilda, we had Membry. But let's talk about the game itself. So a hard-fought contest in the first half with Geelong trying to break away, but the Saints, the young Saints Saints team, just wouldn't let Geelong get away. It was a really good performance from them, with Geelong not being able to push this margin past 4 goals. And in the third quarter, the Cats were kept goalless. They kicked 6 behind, so they had their chances, but St Kilda did really well to keep them goalless. Unfortunately, on the other end, which St Kilda have pretty much always had issues with, they just couldn't get it on the other end. They couldn't kick goals. They only kicked 1 goal 3, and it looked like Geelong, you kind of felt like Geelong would get back onto it and just take the game away. And it looked like that halfway through the last quarter. Geelong had a 21-point lead at the 17-minute mark, and it looked like Geelong were pretty much cruising on. And they thought, okay, well, they had a bit of a scare, but this will be like a 5-goal win. But the Saints charged right back into the game. It was almost a shock. I didn't see this coming. We saw the likes of Sharman, King, and then the debutant in Wilson kick goals. And it was set up for a massive last few minutes of the game. But Dangerfield took a great mark right on 50, and he went back and converted it. And he's always had issues with his set shot goal kicking, Dangerfield, but it was a great kick, faded back nicely, and gave the Geelong fans who were there to unveil the Joel Selwood stand a great finish for them. I'm still not 100% convinced on Geelong so far. They've still got a lot to prove to me if they're going to be a real contender this year or even a top 8 team. I did pick them to finish 8th, but they've got a lot more to prove. St Kilda's team wasn't exactly littered with stars. Sinclair was obviously out as well. Geelong's midfield is still quite testy. Dangerfield had to have a good performance to get them over the line. So we'll have to wait and see on Geelong. I'm still a wait and see on them. St Kilda, on the other hand, it's kind of the same thing. St Kilda need to show me some signs right now. They've got Collingwood next week. That's going to be such a big game at the MCG. It's the Danny Frawley game, of course. So that's probably the game we're going to be streaming next week. So make sure to come along if you want to join on the streams. But let's get to the stats. For the AFL Fantasy watchers out there, Rowan Marshall led all comers with the 118. Jack Steele with the 108. Dangerfield with the 105. Bonner with the 102, playing his first game for the Saints. And then Duncan and Holmes both finished on 99. Now let's get to the votes. For the 3 votes, I gave it to Max Holmes. He had a massive performance playing off that halfback wing role this year, it looks like. 2 votes I gave to Rowan Marshall, and 1 vote I gave to little-known player in Dempsey. He was hardly I think this is his 3rd game of AFL footy, and I think his first couple of games were a sub, so no one really knew about this guy, but he played up forward, and he just gave something different for Geelong's forwards. You know, he kicked 3 goals in the end, scored 92 fantasy points for anyone wondering, so could be a choice if you want to pick him up. But he was massive. He took some really good marks. He looked good, and the young players, they've finally got to play them, Geelong. I think Chris Scott's kind of known now. They have to play their young players, or else they're just going to go right down the ladder real quick. But he's definitely one they can build off of, and he had a good performance in the end, which is why he got the 1 vote. Let's get to the other Saturday night game, the Gold Coast Suns versus the Crows. The Gold Coast held on against the Crows when this game never should have got this close. The Gold Coast absolutely dominated the Crows for 3.5 quarters, and somehow the Crows almost stole it from out of nowhere. Nonetheless, the Suns won by 6 points in the end, 60-54. Top goal scorer in the end was Joshua Shelley. Basically wasn't seen for, I think he kicked the goal in the somewhere through the game, and then kicked 2 late goals and suddenly became like Eddie Betts. Like, it was just out of nowhere. Let's talk about the game itself, though. First of all, I have to mention the conditions of this game were absolutely dreadful. It was pissing down rain for a lot of the contest. It was hot and humid. It was Matt Rao's wet dream, but everyone else was kind of disappointed. There was so much in favour of them. Some people were saying the umpires. Look, I think the umpiring was pretty dreadful, but I don't think that's the reason why the Gold Coast led by so much. They were dominating. They were dominating in the midfield. Their forward line looked strong, and their defence was holding up very well. The dominance of the Suns' midfield was massive. Rao, Miller, Anderson, Flanders just were way too strong for the Crows. Dawson was pretty well held for most of the game. Laird didn't have a massive performance. So really, in the end, the Gold Coast, it was a good performance 3.5 quarters. If they ended the game as strong as they, played those first 3.5 quarters, I'd be sitting here saying the Gold Coast, like such a better team this year. They look like maybe they can prove those doubters who said, oh, they're not going to make finals this year, give them a couple more years, wrong. But those doubts just creep into your mind with the Suns. They just could not do enough for me to give them, the tick of approval just yet. They almost let the Crows steal this, and the Crows had no right to be in this game in the last quarter. They didn't look like they wanted to be there. Now, granted, Taylor Walker was out, and if you are a Crows supporter watching this, don't have too many worries. You were missing your best player in the game, and also Riley Philthorpe was out, but he's out for a while. Your team did not look like you wanted to be there, and that's not a good sign, I'll give you that, but they'll be fine. The fact, though, that the Crows were able to come back into this game and almost steal it is absolutely astounding. But this was a Gold Coast fadeaway. They almost lost this because they just didn't show up in the last 10 minutes. They almost let them steal it. Damien Hardwick was pulling out grey hairs out of his head. He definitely realised the stresses of coaching again. But let's get to the stats. So AFL fantasy-wise, Noah Anderson led all comers with the 126. Sam Flanders with the 119. Roy Laird with the 119 as well. Matt Rao with the 115. Matt Crouch with the 113. And Braden Fiorini with the 100 on an even keel. Looking at the votes, I gave the 3 votes to Matt Rao. I thought he was such a bull. Like I said, this game was his wet dream. I think he dreams about these games being wet and wild. Don't take that out of context. Anyway, Noah Anderson with the 2 votes, and the 1 vote went to Sam Flanders. Let's move to Sunday, first game between Melbourne and the Bulldogs. Melbourne, and this game was actually quite close for the first 3 quarters. I thought maybe the Dogs could just steal this one, maybe late. They had some chances in the third term, but in the end, the Demons were able to keep them at bay, and then they were able to run away with it, which was really good to see. I want to mention Max Gawn. Massive first half from him, just answering all the criticism that he had over the opening round, which, by the way, was not even warranted. Like, they were saying that he was... I said this last week. The guy was playing in, 30-degree weather, humid weather in Sydney. It was terrible conditions. It was the first real hit out for the Melbourne Demons. And the guy's 32 years of age. Give him a break when he gets knocked over and stuff. I do think that's definitely a downfall of his game, that he can be pretty much pushed out of a game if he gets met with some bit of contact. And he definitely responded very well. In that first half especially, he had 15 disposals, 4 marks, which is something that he actually couldn't do against the Swans. I don't even think he took a mark against Sydney. And just was like that extra midfielder that he's been for so long for the Demons. Yeah, like I said, it was a close game, but then the Demons in the final quarter were able to kick 6 goals to the Dogs too, and were able to break away by, what was it in the end? The Demons won 109-64, the Dogs, so a 45-point win. A little bit disappointing on the Dogs' side, I'm going to be honest. I think that Rory Lobb's going to get immediately dropped and Darcy's going to come in. Tim English was pretty well beaten in the first half. In the second half, he came back a little bit on Max Gawn. Max Gawn didn't have exactly a massive influence like he did in that first half, but in the end, the Dogs have issues. They just have so many midfielders. Even Jack McRae didn't even play today. Treloar couldn't use his foot skills. I think he only had 9 kicks in the end. Montempelli was pretty well held in the end. The Bulldogs again struggled to kick a winning score. I mean, on paper, I know I mentioned before that Mackay and Curnow are like the best duo in the comp for forwards. Jamara Ugle-Hagan and Norton, on paper, should be up there, but right now they're not even close. And they just have to find a way to goal. Like, Jamara had a pretty good game. He kicked 2 goal 3. But he's got to kick 4 goal 1 at the very least. And Norton was well held. I will say, on the other hand, though, that the fact that the teams in the opening round got to play against teams in round 1 that haven't played a game yet, I think is so unfair. The fact that these teams haven't had any sort of match fitness like the Bulldogs and the Crows last night as well, I think it's incredibly unfair because I think the match fitness of the extra game is so much more beneficial than having the week off. That's just my opinion. I don't know if you guys agree. That's just me. Looking at the stats, AFL fantasy-wise, Jack Billings led all comers with the 140. Where the fuck did this come from? Well, I mean, maybe St Kilda were right to pick him up before Bontempelli. Not true. But Great performance from him playing off the wing. He doesn't actually get into the votes in the end, but he had a massive performance. So good job to Jack Billings in his second game for the Demons. Well, first full game. He did play as a sub in opening round. Max Gawn got the 137. Stephen May with the 121. Petrarca as well with the 121. Clayton Oliver with the 114. And then Tim English rounds out the top 6 with the 113. Let's get to the votes. So, with the 3 votes, I gave to Max Gawn, 2 votes to Clayton Oliver, and 1 vote to May. Now, Clayton Oliver, I do want to quickly mention, great performance from him. It's really good to see him back and firing. They had a little interview with him after the game. Still tried to pepper him with questions about how his off-season went and stuff. Really good performance from him. He had 35 touches. It was the Clayton Oliver of old. I hope he can just build on this season. I've been very vocal on our Bounty Riders podcast, how I feel about how he's been treated over the off-season. Not even a Melbourne supporter, and I think I'm protecting him very much. But I think that he had a very good game, and if he can build into the season, Melbourne can definitely build upon it. I still think they've got some concerns up forward, but today they were able to kick over 100 points. They were able to find avenues to goal, so you can't have any question marks for Melbourne at the moment. Next up, let's move to Port Adelaide versus the West Coast Eagles. Look, Port Adelaide just did what they had to do. They went on to win by 50 points, 122 to the West Coast, who finished on 70. Really good performance from Port Adelaide in the end, but like I said, it was just a performance that they had to do. West Coast, they kicked 10 goals. I mean, there's not a lot of positives, I'm going to be honest with you, with West Coast. Port Adelaide in the end finished with 40 scoring shots and kicked only 16 goals. They could have demolished them by over 100 points here, West Coast. So, has much changed? Not on round 1. I'm not thinking that's much of a change for West Coast. Harley Reid played his first game. He had an okay performance. He finished with 16 touches, 2 marks and 2 tackles. It's an okay performance from him to start off with. I think the expectations on him have been widely promoted to way too much. I think he's been on the WA newspaper on the back page 31 out of 41 days. Like, that is ridiculous. But anyway, Jeremy McGovern had an okay game, so good on him. But other than that, Port Adelaide just dominated from start to finish. Let's stop sugarcoating it. Let's look at the stats, though. For the AFL Fantasy watchers out there, Connor Rozee finished on the 111. Zach Butters with the 107. Ivan Soldo in his first game for Port Adelaide with the 98. Miles Bergman with the 97. Willem Drew with the 94. And then Horn Francis with the 87. So now let's get to the votes. I know these are the top 3 for the AFL Fantasy, and most of the year this won't happen, but I believe these are the 3 best players on the ground. So, 3 votes went to Connor Rozee, 2 votes went to Zach Butters, and finally, Ivan Soldo, in his first game for Port, got the 1 vote. He kicked 2 goals in the end, had 28 hit-outs. He had 12 score involvements at the ruckman, had 6 clearances as well, 4 of them were centre clearances. That's a great performance from Ivan Soldo, and at Richmond, he's never really had the number 1 ruck role. Obviously, Toby Nankervis has had it for so long now and obviously deserves it. So now he's gone to Port Adelaide. He's had a fight with a pretty good ruckman who's played in the VFL a lot, Jordan Sweet. He got the number 1 role today and had a really good performance. Granted, he was playing against Bailey Williams, who is still not really a recognised ruckman. West Coast, throughout the whole preseason, they obviously recruited Matt Flynn. He injured himself and probably misses half the season, which is really disappointing. Bailey Williams had to go back in there, and in the end, Port Adelaide just dominated pretty much start to finish, and I don't think anyone else expected different. Sorry guys, I'm recording this part a bit late because this is the last game of the round, but of course, what a massive upset we saw. Fremantle were able to upset the grand finalists from last year in the Lions to send them to 0 wins and 2 losses. So the Dockers in the end pretty much held the lead for all the second half and majority of the game up to Brisbane kicked the first 4 goals of it, and Fremantle went on to win 93-70. So a massive performance from the Dockers in the end. It was a really impressive game. I didn't see this coming one bit. Probably the biggest point of this game was probably for bad reasons, on the fact that there was 5 injuries, 3 to Fremantle and 2 to Brisbane. So first of all, we'll talk about the injury to Warner, young player for the Dockers. In the second half, all these injuries happened in the second half, which was insane. He had a collision with Lincoln McCarthy. They met pretty hard. Warner, unfortunately, came off second best and was subbed out with concussion. So that's really unfortunate. He'll miss next week. A little bit more serious, these other 2 for Fremantle. Oscar McDonald, really unfortunate. Obviously, this is his 3rd club now after being delisted twice in his career. He hyperextended his knee. I really hope for the best for him, but this could be yet another ACL injury, which would be so disappointing. We've already seen so many already in the first round and a half already, so that's really terrible. And then we saw Brandon Cox in the last quarter do a serious hamstring injury, and he's had this sort of injury in the past with his hamstring. He grabbed straight to the hamstring, and Fremantle did not only really well to win this game against a really good opposition, but to do it without three players like off the bench is insane. So kudos to Fremantle, and hopefully all their injury woes are okay after the next couple of weeks, because they've already got quite a few players on the injury list as it is. Now, looking at the other side, I'm not too sure about this first one I'm going to talk about. Is Jasper Fletcher. It was reported on the AFL website. He was listed that he was injured and out of the game. I'm unsure as to what that injury was. I don't think they reported it in the broadcast, but he was out for the rest of the game. And Darcy Gardner was subbed out at half-time for the Brisbane Lions as well. So really disappointing that we saw 5 injuries in the last game of the round. Hopefully all of them aren't too serious. Hoping for the best. Let's talk about the game itself, though. Brisbane started this game with a house on fire. They kicked the first 4 goals of the game, absolutely blitzed Fremantle out of the blocks, and it looked like Brisbane were back to their best. Fremantle kicked a couple of goals late in the first quarter. Brisbane held on a good lead, but then all of a sudden Fremantle sprung to life. They kicked 5 goals in the second quarter, take a good lead into half-time, and kept Brisbane to only 6 more goals for the remainder of the match, and 5 of them came in the last quarter. So Brisbane basically for a half of footy between the second and third quarter kicked 1 goal. That is unheard of for the Brisbane Lions. So massive performance for Fremantle. I'm not writing off Brisbane yet, though. This is way too early. Similar to Collingwood. They've got to improve, though. They're in the same boat as Collingwood right now. They're both not playing good footy, and the fact Brisbane, they have now had 2 games in a row now where they've conceded a huge amount of goals. They conceded 8 goals against Carlton to lose the game, and I think they conceded 7 or 8 goals against Fremantle. So it's not very good at all. So the Lions have the bye next week, and then in round 3 they have Collingwood. So this is it's a real test. Both of those teams going up against each other. One of them will be 0-3. So obviously Brisbane going into the bye with a lot of questions to answer. Luckily for Collingwood's sake, I guess, they get a pretty short turnaround. They get to play against St Kilda on Thursday. Let's look at the statistics of the Fremantle game. With the AFL Fantasy scores out there, we had Caleb Sarong on 161, Josh Dunkley on 126, Liam Ryan on 125, Andrew Brayshaw on the 118, Joe Danaher with the 117, and then James Aish with the 113. That's the top 6 players there. And we'll get to the Bounty Riders votes now. Pretty obvious as to who's going to be getting the 3 votes in this game. Caleb Sarong had 46 touches. That's not only a career high for him, but it's a career high for Fremantle. No other player's done that before. He was massive around the ground. Great performance from Caleb Sarong. The 2 votes went to Liam Ryan, and the 1 vote is going to go to Luke Jackson. I absolutely love Luke Jackson's game in the end. He had 18 touches, 6 score involvements, 2 goals. Dominated in the ruck, had the 30 hitouts as well. So massive performance from Luke Jackson. He trained a lot through the preseason as a forward because they were expecting Sean Darcy to play. Obviously he was injured, so he took the ruck role that I just think he's accustomed to. I mean, obviously both of them are really good ruckmen, so you can't play them both in there. But Luke Jackson, I just think he's a born and bred ruckman. I mean, I guess Fremantle, when they've obviously got the likes of Sean Darcy, who's a little bit injury prone, it is always good to have a player like Luke Jackson who's pretty durable. But yeah, guys, that's basically all we have for the review of round 1. Thank you for watching or listening. Of course, we are putting these up on Spotify, so if you are listening on Spotify, make sure to leave 5 stars if you did enjoy it, and check out the podcast as well. If you're on Spotify, you might as well. And also make sure to leave a follow over there as well so you're notified on all the episodes. And if you're on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. We are so close to 500 subs on YouTube. I think we're about 20 or 30 away now, so if you want to subscribe, that would be much appreciated. But thank you for listening and watching, and we'll catch you all next time.